Man, WandaVision is turning into one of the, best things that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has ever had. I feel like that poster's gonna get distracting. Um, so episode 5 aired tonight, and definitely some things were revealed that I think some people were guessing. But there's a few other things that we haven't really seen from the characters before, and some of the discussions that they had got me very excited. So, just real quick, I'm still loving it. Every episode is starting to get even better than the last. I know, and there were some comments about the last episode that maybe they played that card too early. They started to explain things too early, and even that it felt a bit rushed. And I agree, it almost did feel a bit too rushed with the explanation. I wish things were slowed down a little, but it was still a very excellent episode that I think was good to start that early with explaining things, because I was assuming in the future episodes they would bounce between the sitcom and the real world and be able to slowly explain other things, but they haven't explained everything yet. They didn't by episode 4, and by episode 5 they haven't, but they did start to bounce between both narratives, which I was very happy to see, which is something I was hoping to see. So with episode 5, at this point I feel like it will just be spoilers, and some theories that I have, because I'm starting to just guess about different things that will happen, which I really haven't done for Marvel stuff since the Avengers movies came out. I guess, usually for these one-off movies or solo films and TV shows, I guess, too, I don't really get too much into the theories. I usually like to just see how it all plays out. That hasn't been the case with Spider-Man, at least, but I've been mostly guessing to see who would be appearing in it. And with the Avengers movies, there was a lot to kind of guess about those. But WandaVision, which is kind of a solo film itself, or television show, definitely stretched out. It's like a stretched out film in a way. I usually don't make tons of predictions or theories about, but, given that it's an episode a week, there's a lot of room to discuss it, and it really is setting up things for what Phase 4 is going to be. So at this point, it's all spoilers. If you haven't seen the episode, please keep up with the show. I know some people might prefer to wait until it's all out so they can binge it. I've said it before, I'm not a big fan of binging, so I'm actually happy that it's an episode a week. And at first, I kind of wondered if it was going to even work as a show that's an episode a week. Because to me, I don't enjoy the idea of binging. I feel like people talk about the show too quickly, it goes away, and you got to dedicate a lot of time real quick to watch it if you want to get on that discussion hype. Otherwise, it just goes away. Unlike The Mandalorian, where we just talked about it for a very long time. So now we are up to this show, which the first 2 episodes made me think maybe it should be a bingeable show. But now that they're starting to reveal more things, it's leaving a mystery. There's a lot to discuss every week. So now I'm starting to understand why it should be an episode a week. Lots to talk about at this point. So, spoilers start here. Obviously, the first thing I should talk about is Evan Peters, who showed up as Pietro. Kind of confusing, because he is Peter Maximoff from the X-Men universe, but here, he's very explicitly, at the moment, within the sitcom cast as Pietro. He is not just playing Peter from the X-Men yet. They're just calling him Pietro, and as Kat Dennings was watching from the screen, she says it's a recast. So I've read some theories already online that people seem to think that it actually is just a different character, that Evan Peters is actually someone who lives in the town, who may play a bigger role later, but is not actually Peter Maximoff from the X-Men universe, and he's not being carried over from the multiverse, but he's actually someone else, and they're only doing that as an Easter egg. Or that, well, before that, I will just say, I don't agree with that. I think it's very obvious what they're trying to do. It's him from the X-Men, and obviously when they're within this world, their mind gets slightly warped, so he was, I believe, plucked from a different universe, because Wanda cannot bring back her brother. So she just plucked someone out of the universe who is very similar to him. He is not the he doesn't have the same backstory. He's not even from the same time period as Pietro, but I believe he is about the closest of an equivalent that Wanda could find. So she plucked him out, put him in, and now that he's in this dome, I believe his mind is warped, much like the other character from Captain Marvel, the aged up character, the way that she was put into it, and then her mind was warped. Like, she didn't have memories of what happened before she entered until she started to make connections with Wanda. I think some people think that she had 100% consciousness that whole time and she was just playing the part, but I don't agree. I think she actually had her mind warped, and it was only after a few connections that she made to the real world that she started to wake up, which is the same that Vision is doing. So, just to clear that up, though, as far as Evan Peters goes, I think it's very easy. It's him from the X-Men, and I think that's where it's going to go, and it's going to open up the door to the multiverse. The other thing to talk about would be some of the cool lines that were dropped. Like, someone mentioned that during the final battle in Endgame, how Scarlet Witch was very close to taking down Thanos. Some people have been questioning, well, those characters weren't even there when it happened. Well, come on, people have been talking about it. It was one of the biggest events that happened probably in the entire world. Imagine it. Everyone's probably talked about it by now. So I'm sure those events, by all the people who were there, have been retold many times. But someone, Randall Park's character, actually mentions that, well, I hear that Captain Marvel became pretty close to, taking down Thanos herself. And the character from Captain Marvel really doesn't have anything to say to that. And I think the only reasoning for that is because I don't think she's seen Captain Marvel since the 90s. And I think it's bad. I don't think they have a good relationship, especially since her mother has died, which kind of makes sense. And I'm going to love when they finally go into that with Captain Marvel 2. I don't really think they'll go into it beyond that, but we'll see. She's also going to call someone who knows something about aerospace, when some people have thought that's going to be the Fantastic Four. I think that's just a line drop. I think that's similar to when one of the characters early on, I'm trying to remember, which character was it? One of the movies, they were just kind of dropping some different powers that everybody had, and one of them was like, we got a guy who can climb walls, we got a guy who can shrink, and at that point, they hadn't introduced all those characters, but there was a guy who was referencing them, and I think, man, what movie was that in? It might have been Age of Ultron, but point is, I think that's a real quick reference. I think it is a reference to Reed Richards, but I don't think Reed Richards is actually going to show up in this show. But we'll see. I don't think he's been cast yet. A lot of people have been thinking it's going to be John Krasinski. I maybe, but it's a very popular fan casting, and I could see Marvel almost just doing it, but I don't think they'll be in this show. But I do think that was a reference at Reed Richards. But I think that was mostly done for the fans. I don't think it was really as an Easter egg. I don't think it's meant to build to something bigger later, especially since she didn't complete the phone call. The other big thing to talk about would be what's going on in general. So, they have a big fight in this episode, Vision and Wanda. They're also in the 80s at this point with the sitcom, and the boys are being aged up. And I know that there's some comic book references there, but honestly, I don't know much about that. But I know that those characters are actual characters from the comic book. So if you want to explain it to me in the comments, that'd be great. But the conversation that they have, Vision is starting to kind of wake up, and he's accusing Wanda of creating this whole environment. And she does walk out of the dome at one point and tells them to stay out. All of the people from SWORD who are trying to come in or try to stop it from happening. So it seems like she thinks she's in control, and she's secretly acting like she's not to everyone who's in the TV show world. But Vision is starting to wake up, and he can wake up other people. Now, is Wanda actually in control of it? Seems like it, and there's a good reason to think that she is. And also, they show that she took Vision's corpse to reanimate it, and I believe it's just a dead corpse that's been floating around. But there's a couple things with that. First, is he actually alive? No, I think they made it very clear that she can't bring people back to life. However, Vision is a robot, or at least a big chunk of him was. Remember in Infinity War when they said, let's take the stone out, maybe the best parts of Vision are still there. And maybe they are. In fact, maybe there's some supercomputer components of him that are still active even though he's a deceased person. And maybe that's why, in a way, he can still sort of wake up from the reality that Scarlet Witch has created. So he is dead, but the computer components of him are still alive, in a way, if that makes any sense. To me, that's what it kind of seems like, because it doesn't make sense that he'd be able to break out of it then, unless they're doing it for thematic purposes, which is fine, but I think there's a reason for everything. Scarlet Witch also, she's considered to be in control of everything in this episode, and Vision explicitly says that to her, but he has the ability to wake people up out of it. Now, possibly, he is just doing that. But what if, actually, Wanda's not in control of everything? What if it's actually a ploy to use her powers, because actually it's Vision who's in control? And in fact, it's not actually even just Vision who's in control. What if someone is actually controlling Vision? That line from Infinity War, the best parts of Vision might still be there if you take the stone out. Well, what if that's a wrong theory? What if they took the stone out, he's able to operate again, but by taking the stone out, he's actually evil? In fact, Ultron, when Ultron was destroyed, his body was destroyed, but what if the operating system wasn't? I know some people will challenge that by saying, well, that was the last bit of the AI. The last bit of the AI was in that one robot that Vision destroyed at the end of Age of Ultron. But what if it wasn't? What if Ultron is still out there? There's already been theories that James Spader may show up later, and he's also not the big cameo that both of the main leads had pointed to in their interviews recently. They both said a bigger cameo is coming, and they said it hadn't been leaked yet. Well, both James Spader and Evan Peters were kind of leaked, so there's still one more big cameo out there, which I'm going to get to quick. But I believe, my theory right now is that Vision is actually the one in control of everything, and that he's actually being controlled by Ultron, who's trying to find a new body, because his body is still there. There's no stone. He's not alive as the human that he was becoming when he was Vision because of the stone, but the body, the robotic parts are still there, and they are operating. They can still operate, and I believe Ultron has taken it over, and Ultron will reveal himself eventually, and I believe Ultron's just doing this as a ploy to get Scarlet Witch to use her powers to manipulate her, and eventually I believe she'll be the villain of Doctor Strange 2. I also believe that the multiverse portion of it, which, Pietro, which she said, I didn't do that. I don't think she has complete control over her powers. She thinks she has control over the town, and I think she thinks that, and I think she's allowed to have control in a way, but I don't think she's the one simply creating it all. I think there's a little more to it. I think Vision also has a big hand in controlling it. She has the powers, but he has some of the control, and he doesn't even know it, because he's being controlled by Ultron, if that makes sense. But she has the ability to pull people out of the multiverse, which I think she's only done once so far, but I believe she's about to tear the whole thing open. I believe that's exactly what's going to happen. The big cameo that's coming, I believe, there's been some theories. I heard that maybe it'd be Thanos. I've heard that maybe it's just Aaron Taylor Johnson, but I feel like that wouldn't be a big one, especially since Paul Bettany said that it was an actor that he hasn't worked with yet, but he's always wanted to work with. That leaves up the possibility of maybe bigger names, because we need some bigger villain to show up eventually. And I know there's been different theories about who the big villain could be, but I've heard, like, for instance, there's big names who haven't been in the Marvel movie yet who could easily be villains, like Bryan Cranston. That would make sense as just, bringing in a new villain. And they didn't necessarily say, they said two different things from what I remember about the interview, because I know one said it was going to be a big cameo, but Paul Bettany said it was just someone he wanted to work with, so not necessarily a cameo from the MCU or the larger Marvel world. So it could just be a one-off appearance from a big-name actor for a future villain role, or maybe even hero role. It could maybe be Reed Richards, but I don't think they cast that soon. Maybe. And it could be just Thanos, but like I said, Paul Bettany said he hadn't worked with him yet. I think, possibly, it could be Hugh Jackman as Wolverine for one of the final episodes. I know he had said previously that he wasn't going to play Wolverine ever again, but he also said in an interview that if he were to ever come back, it would be to be in an Avengers movie. I don't think he's going to become a permanent mainstay of the Avengers, but since they're opening up the multiverse, and there's a lot of very well-casted X-Men, I'm sure Disney wants to move forward with different X-Men, newer X-Men, but also there's just some really good characters from the original X-Men movies that could easily be brought back. Take the ones you like, don't take the ones you don't like. And, maybe some people wouldn't think that's fair, but they have the right to do it, and they could easily do it by just saying, hey, multiverse. They already have proven that they're going to do it, because I think everyone's thinking a little too hard about the fact that Evan Peters is in this. I don't think his role is any more complicated than he is just going to be the character from X-Men, the equivalent of Pietro, but he's going to be the very same character who's from the others, or at least the embodiment of that character. Similar to what they're doing with Jamie Foxx in the new Spider-Man movie, where he's not really the Electro from Amazing Spider-Man 2, but he's still Electro, but like a different version of him. Same with J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. Not necessarily the same one, but similar. I think it could be Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, because I think that's too good of an opportunity to pass up, to have him appear in at least one future Avengers movie, plus possibly that Deadpool movie, because I think everyone would love to see something with them, in real time, rather than just Deadpool making jokes about Wolverine. I think it'd be great to see them together. My other theory is possibly Magneto. Do we get Fassbender or do we get Ian McKellen? Well, I think age-wise, it seems like this version of Evan Peters is a little bit older than the version that he was in the prequel movies that took place in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and that was all the ones that he was in. So Fassbender, who was in all those too, I think technically at this point, and they never said exactly when X-Men took place, it was always like the future, but it was like a few years in the future, so the 2000s or late to 2010s at least. He's Ian McKellen at that point. So possibly at this point of the timeline, and I know some people will say, well, it's the 80s sitcom, that's why he looks like how he did in X-Men Apocalypse. But no, I actually think they already aged him up a little. I don't think Quicksilver ages too much because his cells regenerate that fast, so he actually doesn't age as much. But the Ian McKellen issue can't be answered, because would it be Fassbender or Ian McKellen? Well, some people would say because it's the 80s for the sitcom, and by next week's episode it'd be the 90s, and in Dark Phoenix, Fassbender was still playing Magneto, it would be him if he showed up. If they decide to have Magneto be the big cameo instead of, my big theory is Wolverine, but another very popular one is Magneto. But I think it would actually have to be Ian McKellen, because at this point, and I know with the sitcom, well, that takes place in the 90s. Yeah, but it's real time. It's not like when the character from Captain Marvel stepped into the world. She was suddenly like, even when she stepped in, it was the 70s. She wouldn't have been born yet. But it's not like if she stepped into like the 90s episode, she would revert to her 90s self. Unless they do that, which that will screw up my theory. But I don't think that's what it is. I don't think it takes you back to, it changes you, but it doesn't literally change your age too. I think at this point of MCU's timeline, it'd be old enough where Ian McKellen would be the one that shows up. Unless the multiverse ignores time parameters, which it might. But I think it'd be Ian McKellen. And I know what you think, well, he's an older actor, maybe he's just done with the role. But my only other reason why I think this is possible, I don't know when they started shooting all this. I don't know if they've been shooting reshoots since the pandemics began, but Ian McKellen was one of the first people in the world to get the COVID shot. Is there a reason he had to get it? Was he going to go film something? Was it a reshoot for WandaVision?